Hello, everyone. Please come to the front. There are seats here, and we look forward to your questions and engagement. I know you're never shy. It is Friday afternoon. I know. It is Flag Day. But we're not flagging because this is going to be a wonderful conversation. It's wonderful to see students here. It's wonderful also to see our provost, other academic leaders, and the head of our library. Ron, have you Ron? Well, that's Ron Berry. He's our head librarian, and also the head of academic technology. We integrate these two things. Academic technology, yeah. So classroom support and things like that. So you all know these Vice Chancellors roundtables. We have them about every 2 or 3 weeks, and we have as my guest always a leader, usually a founder of something, a CEO, a mentor extraordinary, whether it's from banking and investment banking or value creation, diplomacy. We've had David Cameron, the former prime minister. We've had artists. We've had Ray Allen, a great. He was the most recent one. You're in good company.
Wow.
Or he is.
Are you sure you want me to do this?
He's in good. You don't have to talk us through the shot, which he did. Anyhow, it's really fun because it's a way of thinking about career journeys for people at any level of their journey, whether they are our wonderful students who are getting prepared for different kinds of industries and sectors and a life well lived, but also for all of us who are at other stages of our career. We always keep learning. We are a learning community. And I'm really delighted because as we have had people working in media here before, in film, and so on, we haven't had anyone in academic publishing. And we have really what I would say is the ultimate in academic publishing as my guest here today, or rather he represents and leads a very important organization, Youngsuk. He goes by YS. And YS is a true leader in media and technology. And he currently serves Elsevier and RELX in several capacities. For example, for RELX, his primary role is as Director of Corporate Affairs and Asia Strategy, responsible for government affairs, corporate communications, and corporate responsibility. How I know him best, though, is in his work with Elsevier, and in another way I'll describe in a minute. He is the non-executive chairman of the board of Elsevier, and that's an incredibly important role. We'll talk about the conglomeration that it is. He'll tell us much about it. And he is nothing if not a truly engaged human being, as you'll see. YS does not take on any challenge or responsibility unless he can do it full on. And I don't know, I think you spin time at night. So you have an extra day in the week or the month. He works directly for Elsevier with governments, with customers and industry associations worldwide. He has most recently served as chairman of the Association of American Publishers, and he had 4 years of service as the president of the International Publishers Association. So when it comes to the world of academic publishing, no one can inform us better about the mega and mini trends of the last 10, 20 years. YS serves on many, many charitable, educational and industry boards, including Princeton University, South Federal State University, the Korean American Community Foundation, and the MacArthur Theater, and of course, not least, the Educational Testing Service, which is not on this card for some reason, because I remember it, the Educational Testing Service, or ETS, which is where I first got to know YS well, because we serve on that board together. He is the vice chair and extremely thoughtful about the role of assessment in education today. For those of you who've never heard of ETS, that's okay. I'm sure you've heard of TOEFL. I'm sure some of you have heard of the SAT. Full disclosure, we didn't make up the SAT, we just administer it for the College Board. The GRE, so assessment, and assessment is really changing, and assessment nowadays is really less about college admissions and so forth. It's really about the whole individual. and how we help them develop and create opportunity for themselves and maximize their talent. And YS and I have a great running conversation about that. With that, I'll jump into some of the questions which have been created with a lot of input from all of you, and we'll also have time to go to questions directly. So let's start with your journey, YS, and welcome. First of all, welcome. Let's all welcome YS.
Thank you so much. I have an imposter syndrome problem right now after you telling me who else participated in this program in the past.
This will be wonderful. And I think when any of us, and especially our students, see an influential leader like you, it's often hard to imagine how did YS get to do all these things? Because there's, of course, a whole journey preceding what I just described. It was just too long, so I didn't give them that. But how did you begin your career journey, ended up in data, media, and technology? And if you want to talk just a little bit about people and mentors who helped shape you along the way.
I hope this is the longest answer I'm going to give you. But first of all, thank you so much for having me here, and it's incredible hospitality. I'm also very jealous of your campus. So I'll give you a little bit of full history to kind of put it in context. I'm a Korean by birth. I was born into a family of diplomat, and I was born in Washington, D.C., outside in Alexandria, Virginia, when my father was working in the embassy. And just for those of you who are curious, I'm not a U.S. citizen by birth, because you're born under the diplomatic immunity. So the bed in which one is born under diplomatic immunity is not the territory of the United States. So I have been a Korean citizen until about 15 years ago when I naturalized. But anyhow, I moved around multiple countries and found myself in my junior years in Senegal, in West Africa, where school stopped after 9th grade, and I had to choose whether I continue my French education or go back to Korea and take the god-awful entrance exam for college, or do something else. And I chose at the time because I wanted to be an engineer. I felt that America had the best engineering universities, and I chose to go to America and see if I can get into a boarding school. So I applied to 8 different boarding schools, the very best that everybody thinks of, the oldest, and got outright rejection because I didn't speak English. I spoke French. I added a supplemental application to an all-boys boarding school in New Jersey after the deadline, and somehow I got in. And so I ended up attending a boys' school about 5 miles south of Princeton. And from there, I moved on to college and graduate school, and was ready to go back and do my military. Thank you. Do my military service and go back to Korea and serve the country. At business school, all these companies come and do pitches about their companies in the evening, and I went to many, many of them, actually, to be precise, about 160 of them. And I took copious notes for each one of them as to who came, what they talked about, and who I should write to. I wrote 16 letters to these companies, and I got a call to do an interview. And it was with American Express. So I went to the interview thinking that I'm going to pitch to become an international banker. And I was interviewed by a young person who had just left our business school and was 28 years old. Probably I was the first interviewee. And toward the end of the 30-minute interview, his boss showed up in big, thick suspenders and a cigar and spoke with me for about 3 minutes. And when I went from 40th floor down to 18th, where HR was located, elevator door opened, and the head of HR said, "So when do you want to start, Youngsuk?"
Wow.
I said, "Wait, what did you just say?" And he said, "I got the first-time call from the president of the company in my career." And he said, "Give this kid a job." I was 20 years old. I never worked in before, and I didn't have a work permit in America. But that 3-minute conversation triggered something that wanted to give me a chance. That individual is Sandy Weil.
Everyone know who Sandy Weil is?
Sandy Weil is the founder of many financial institutions, including take over Lehman. He took over Citibank. He took over CCC, Travelers Insurance. He's a legendary figure. And there's a Weill hospital.
Weill Cornell.
Weill
Cornell
Cornell,
University.
yeah.
He's a great patron of Cornell, of universities and medicine.
Very generous man. And the assistant who interviewed me was a young man by the name of Jamie Dimon, the CEO of the most important bank in the world called JP Morgan today. That's how luck had triggered in my life since continuously. So I spent 8 years in banking, and then I got called, and there's another story I will tell another time. And I went to IT industry, sold that business very successfully, then went to distribution. And that distribution was book distribution. And first day at work, who would visit us but a guy by the name of Jeff Bezos? Amazon. And he wanted to start Amazon, but he didn't want to have inventory because that takes too much capital. And he wanted to use the inventory of our company, which was the world's largest wholesale distributor of books at the time, and it still is today. And he wanted to locate in Seattle so he could be close to our inventory in our warehouse. And I worked with him, and then he pushed me and pushed me. We shipped all of his books for the first 3 years, got him started at Amazon, then invented a machine which got celebrated last night at the Sharjah International Book Fair. It's a print-on-demand book that prints one copy of a book in 18 seconds. So my engineering background helped. I invented the machine, and that was 26 years ago. And then from then on, I was recruited to go and become president of Random House. And then when that same person moved to Elsevier 19 years ago, I was asked to come along. So I gave you the little journey, but what I should emphasize here is that I had never decided to be a banker. I never decided to be in IT or entrepreneur or inventor or distribution or publishing. I made a choice to work for two people, and that's what took me with them to these different sectors and businesses. One I have worked with for 42 years, and the other for 28 years.
Wonderful story. Everyone's now doing the math and thinking, how can YS look so young? But these stories are really true. You can look them up, which is why I didn't want to give you the whole background. However, think about it. Clearly, an enormously driven young man on your own to go find yourself a boarding school in America. You know, that's extraordinary in its own right. And then there is this 3-minute conversation with Sandy Weil, and you had no idea who he was. Surely something was added along the way in the way of education. How do you look back, particularly on your Princeton education, perhaps, and how it influences what you became and what you do today?
You know, Mariette, I do get asked a lot of questions about how education has affected what I do and what I have enjoyed. And the simplest answer I can give is that my education, whatever I learned in class, I don't use it and I don't remember, but all of these institutions have taught me how to learn. And that is so important because we have to reinvent ourselves so many times. In our generation, Mariette and I, we may have to reinvent ourselves 3 or 4 times. But in the younger generation, as I see those of you in the audience, you might have to reinvent yourself more than half a dozen times. And each time you have to learn something new again. And I think that that's why I always take my head off to research professors, because they have to be constantly learning new things that they have not learned. Even though they appear to be adjacent, often it's not. And they know how to learn. And I think that that's what I believe the Princeton education, especially when you have to write a thesis to graduate as an undergrad, right? You really learn to ask questions. And I think that that is the true value of liberal arts education. And that I will always take with me, and that's my gratefulness to the education.
ask and listen. We do a lot of that here, and here also everyone does a capstone, whether it's a thesis or a different kind of product these days.
capstone
And
is
it's
very
so
important.
important asking the right questions. Let's talk about Elsevier for a little bit. I think of Elsevier as a great Dutch book publishing house. And as a scholar of 17th century Netherlands, I think of it as a Dutch publishing house with storied roots in 17th century Amsterdam. There was a time that it might almost have gone broke, but a widow took it over and kept it going late in the 17th century. Our former Dean of Arts and Humanities, Reinhard Valkenburg, there is also someone from the 17th century, and he is very much agreeing with me, I can see. So to me, Elsevier was just this amazing, already sort of certainly European-wide publisher in the 17th century. But of course today, and I still think it is, but today, of course, it is a huge global company. Can you describe and define Elsevier for us today?
Today, Elsevier is what I would call a support mechanism for research community. So if there were ever the equivalent of Oscars, we would never be able to be nominated for Best Actor or Best Director. We would always be supporting actor or supporting actress, right? Our purpose, and this is why I think the people on our team so much enjoy working at Elsevier, is to support the research entities, the research individual, research housed institutions like NYU, and then research funding bodies. That's who we support. And the way we support them is through content first, and then now, as content is all data, through the analytics of that data. So we have evolved. We were a book publisher until 1947. And in 47, we had our first journal ever. And then during the 1960s, 70s, and early 80s, through the hyperinflation, many journal publishers were going under. There were societies, there were university presses, and one by one, entities like Pergamon and Elsevier and Springer started to take those in. And that's how they grew very large as a publishing, journal publishing entities. Back in 1995, my predecessor was obviously prescient because he decided to invest in digitizing everything in the back, from issue 1, volume 1, all the way to that point, and then publish digitally from that point forward. By the time I arrived, everything was already digital. And being digital simply means it's data. And that means that if you have software, you can analyze the data to find things in between the lines. Today we talk about generative AI, but back then it was just pure, AI is nothing but data analytics. That's all it is. It's just a new term. So we have evolved from the time I arrived as digital publisher to now research analytics company as well. The way I would kind of use an analogy is like in food. We used to be a publisher in a traditional way, meaning a farmer. We would grow the content with the research community and figure out how to sell it to a co-op. And you never knew who would use it, how much they would use it, at what price they were using. You didn't know. We used agents and we just sold the subscriptions. Then we started selling directly as an electronic subscription, and that's like setting up a supermarket yourself and knowing who's coming in to buy. But we still didn't know a lot about how they were using it. What we're doing now since 2006 onward is that we've created a food section where you can go and cook from those ingredients. And so we've evolved from being farming to distribution supermarket now to series of restaurants, right? And that's the evolution that we have come. And I'm very lucky to have been there for phase 3, to use the data to let people use their own recipes to cook up whatever it is that they want to do in a truly interdisciplinary manner. And I think that today Elsevier has actually more IT people than we have editors. I mean, it's inconceivable, right? But we have more IT folks, data scientists, software engineers, data structure, architects, than we do editors. That's an incredible journey. And I'm so lucky to have been there for that portion. The next one will be the likes of GAI and PAI, and I think that will be the next journey. And likely I won't be part of that. Someone else is going to enjoy it. But I think that's where we keep going forward.
That's a really fascinating analogy and really helps me see the evolution of these large publishers.
But that's also the story of universities,
it is.
Right? Universities have gone from simple imparting of the knowledge to a lot more than that.
From sage on the stage to guide by the side, if we're lucky. And we learn a lot from the sages in our classroom, actually. Let me stick for a moment with that development you described of publishers like Pergamon ingesting smaller publishing organizations, including academic presses and a whole lot of other things. Elsevier, you can imagine, a Springer, there are a number of them, and they've become, in a way, the Uber academic press. For example, when we used to do evaluation of tenure dockets or hire professors, we would look at what university presses or journals did people publish in, and now people use shortcuts. They say like, well, that was in Springer. Like, we're in Elsevier, DOI, and so forth. Mm-hmm. And there's, of course, a lot of range within those gigantic companies. So let me ask you, do you think the rise of these large publishing, or rather data conglomerates, these supporting institutions, is it a good thing for research culture? Or would, and it is in many of the ways you've described, but would you prefer to see a somewhat more differentiated matrix of academic publishers with some smaller players succeeding? How do you think about this?
I think that conglomerarization of publishing has lots of downside and a few upside. The upside is that as the rest of the world moves, we are not left behind, because we have a few entities that are making enough big bets on new technology, on new methods to be irrelevant. So at the time of the last 25 years, when the likes of Google's have come along, we could have become very easily irrelevant. And we have seen a little more of this in the news organization that we have in the books and the journals. But you know the impact that had on news organizations and how decimated they have become in terms of talent. It's very hard to keep great journalists making a living from journalism. So the size has given us a certain amount of defense to not become irrelevant. But the key is that within that size, we still have to develop an ecosystem inside of Elsevier among these different journals to act differently, to be different, to be pursuing different things. And that is the hard thing to manage internally, right? We want to standardize everything to be efficient, but then that will kill the ecosystem. And so we have to figure out how to leave enough uniqueness of each journal to fit the community that they serve and still be able to achieve the kind of efficiency to be sustainable economically. And that has always been the debate inside Elsevier. Whenever we make a decision, do we use this software? Do we tell authors that they have to submit it this way, or that the peer reviewers have to follow this process? There's a lot of efficiency to be gained, and that's how we keep the cost from rising. But that can also become very much of a barrier to those who do math, who are different from biology, who do different things for psychology. And so that is, the key is to create a critical mass for efficiency, but let inside of it thrive with the uniqueness, kind of like university. We're kind of taking the university model.
It sounds like Abu Dhabi growing.
Yeah. So I think that is the hard part, but we are trying very hard. And there are, as you said, 3 very large entities, us, Springer, and Wiley, in terms of journals. And then you have, believe it or not, but you wouldn't believe me, there were over 3,000 journal publishers. And thousands more of journal owners who don't publish but ask us to publish that are societies. So there is a strong ecosystem today, but it doesn't necessarily appear that way because the back office might be consolidated.
So it is, in fact, more matrixed maybe than meets the eye. Just to give a sense of scale, since you mentioned these 3,000 independent publications, how many journals roughly does Elsevier have in its portfolio?
We actually own the IP rights to about 2,500 or so, and then we publish about 1,000 more journals that are owned by, could be owned by NYU, could be owned by a society, associations. So all in all, we publish about 3,500 different journals.
It's amazing. And of course, there is a benefit to universities in being able to aggregate. But it's also a benefit to the companies to be able to command a price.
Right. So over the 19 years that I've been here, we have more than quadrupled. More between tripled and quadrupled the volume that we publish. But our revenue from the journal business has gone up maybe 10%.
Okay, don't blame Elsevier, people.
No. I mean, you can blame us, but
I'm looking
what
at
we're
Ron.
saying is that, and in the meantime, the usage had gone up by
Right.
whatever X times, right? So we feel good about what we're contributing. We would like to run it even less expensively. I mean, we'd like to introduce more efficiency to the whole process, but it's that balancing act between leaving certain individual characters of the journals to standardization of all the journals. It's a tough balancing.
It really is very much like universities and other creative enterprises. So it's so interesting to hear you speak of this whole journey. And I'm reminding myself that I was a science book editor for 3 years back in the pre-internet age. I'm also dating myself very fast here. I don't think I'd recognize the job today. Us editors, we ran those companies. It was, that we were the content makers, developers, creators, acquirers.
Yeah.
You said there are more IT people than editors. I believe that, but you still have great editors.
Unbelievable.
What makes for a great editor today?
Merritt, I think that the characteristics that make a great editor remains the same. The tools that they use are very different. So a great editor is obviously someone who is curious about where the research is going in certain field, on its own or in collaboration or in tandem with, and has that curiosity to be able to try to go 2 steps ahead with the most advanced thinkers in the field and try to be up there guiding as opposed to behind observing. That is a trait of a great editor. And in order to do that, I think a great editor then has to have the eyes to be able to discern who is a great talent in that area. And that takes time and investment of engagement and whatnot. You have to show up to the society meetings. You've got to be reading a lot about who's doing what. And that kind of characteristic always remains. People think that it has to be someone with great craftsmanship of words. That's nice, but you can always give it to somebody to actually do the copy editing, right? But it's really the architect, someone who can see are buildings becoming round, or are the buildings becoming more angular or linear? Someone who has that kind of view ahead of other people. And when you come across a great editor, you just sit there thinking, wow, how does she think that way? It's just, I'm so jealous when I come across a great editor, a great publisher.
I'm sure you found a few yourself over the years. Obviously, you talked about editing, those particular detail skills. I think this is a good transition maybe to thinking about the digital transformation that you've been on that journey all along. And now, of course, copy editing will be done by ChatGPT. We know that. Now, generative AI, and here's our Dean of Engineering, generative AI, welcome, Summer. Generative AI is top of mind, of course, for all our institutions and definitely for our university and basically every business. What are some of the ethical considerations for Elsevier in relation to AI-generated content? I'm sure you're seeing it and you'll see more of it. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how you see large language models shaping the future of academic publishing.
So GAI, I'm speaking in front of the dean, so I got to be careful what I say, but GAI has been actually around for a while. What has astonished us all last year about this time was the fact that it had become available for public. So at Elsevier, we've been doing generative AI for 11 years before that. And we had our own machine. But it was a tiny little machine the size of this cup. Whereas what ChatGPT exposed to the rest of the world was the size of this room. Because it needed a machine that big to be able to absorb everything from the internet. That was the teacher, right? The teacher of ChatGPT is the internet. Whereas our little machine here was peer-reviewed, curated, organized, structured material only. And the difference between the two is not just the size, but its reliability. And 2 of the 5 great dangers of generative AI as we currently experience deals with hallucination and deep fakes. And that is generated from the fact that the teacher of that machine has taught with facts that are not facts. And therefore the machine thinks, hallucinates, that everything the machine produces is always right. If you go into ChatGPT and you ask a question, you get an answer back, and you go back and say, are you sure this is right? And they'll say, of course it is right. Right? And you all know about the lawyers who lost their bar in New York and Colorado because they filed a court filing with citation of cases, and it turns out none of the cases exist. ChatGPT created them. Now, all they had to do was go to LexisNexis, our sister company, and check that there are actual cases. And that person was too lazy to do that and has lost his bar. So there is that hallucination, and then there is just outright deep fakes. They create an identity of you based on everything it knows, even if it's not true. And so that then creates the problem of cybersecurity, identity, and so on and so forth. So for us, ethical question of GAI is about truthfulness, but it's also about embedded biases. Whatever it learned from has instilled the bias, and we need to make sure we have mechanism to undo the bias, because if not, it continues to build in our civilization that bias. And that's one of the things that we all fight together around inclusion, equity, and diversity, is to get rid of biases that are embedded in our system, right? Whether it's gender or race or physical features or whatever it might be. And so we have created a group of external advisors to participate with us in how we develop our AI going forward. The number one principle is transparency. We will tell the world what has taught that machine, what is the source material, and we will let people know what our algorithms are that uses that source to create generated content. If for our journals, a ChatGPT type of tooled content comes to us, it cannot be labeled as an author. We made that very clear within a month after OpenAI revealed their product, and it was controversial. But we said, ChatGPT is not an author, so we cannot give attribution to that. But you do have to indicate that you used it to write that paper and submit to us. So we are creating more and more of these so-called rules of engagement, but we have to. Otherwise, we're going to lose the trust. And once we lose trust, we lost everything.
That is a very succinct and important description of how these hallucinations and deep fakes come about. I now understand how for about 9 months out there recently, if you looked online and you looked up my name, as my children told me, I'm not in the habit of doing this, it appeared that I was born 12 years before I actually was born. Now, I'm kind of proud for the long life I've lived, but, you know, I haven't lived that long. And so, but it took literally 3 months of a whole team, thank you team at Abu Dhabi, feeding other information, the correct information, to the internet to get rid of it. So this is really a good explanation.
But you just made a really important point that I think audience may not have caught, and that is in a good development of any good tool or good mechanism, there has to be human intervention at expert level to okay it. And that's why we do peer review, right? We do peer review because we want it to be checked by people. So one of the principles of transparency includes that ability to do peer review. And somebody needs to correct what is not right, because otherwise it self-perpetuates. One lie becomes the fact for a fact 3 steps down the road.
That trust and double-blind peer review and so forth are the absolute bedrock of academic truth verification, validation, and in fact the whole credentialing system for top researchers of the kind who constitute our faculty and who we want our graduate students and our students to become. It seems still very challenging what you describe, because not all the journals, as you've told us, that all of the 3,500 or so that Elsevier publishes are yours. Some of them come from these societies, from universities, from other organizations. What is Elsevier doing, or what might you do to ensure the integrity and authenticity of academic content that doesn't come already from your own processes?
Look, we make mistakes too, but being a good publisher doesn't mean that we publish something wrong, that we don't ever publish something wrong. It's about letting the community find out what's wrong and have a mechanism to correct it. That's why there are papers that are withdrawn or they're corrected. So we just have to create an environment in which that kind of correction can safely take place. We have 2 ways to behave concurrently. One is what we do inside with our own journals and journals that we take care of on behalf of societies. That is a lot easier because it's within mostly our power. But it's also the work that we do in the industry association and trying to herd all of us together to adopt a standard that you in academia would trust, right? You have to be not only trusting Elsevier, but anyone to whom you submit your paper. And we are trying very hard through the mechanisms of associations to adopt these principles, these common tools, and common repositories as a way to ensure that that membership gives you the comfort that those who are members of these follow the same rules of engagement. It's almost like being accredited. Somebody else comes and say, okay, you're good enough. That means that a parent can send a child to your school and trust that you follow, certain standards. In the same thing, we as a leader in the publishing industry have a responsibility to try to help the smaller publishers who don't have the resources or don't want to do to join us in the forces. So digitization was a good example. We created a mechanism in which you now take for granted, where you read a paper and there's a citation and you just click and it goes to that article, right? And that seems to be a really simple thing to do. It's not. There's a cross-ref mechanism which we set up in which trusted sources can be clicked over, otherwise you can't. And that database is maintained voluntarily by the publishing community, right? We pay for that because we want you, who we serve, to trust us. So there's going to be more of that in the AI world, and we still don't see all of us eye to eye. But fortunately, the sense of urgency that we are seeing displayed by the academe, by the government, by the press, and by individuals is so strong that we can have some momentum built on this quickly. Like today is the second day of UK AI Summit that Prime Minister Sunak is running. US President Biden had announced his executive order on Monday on AI principles. EU has already published theirs. China has sent their delegation to UK to share their AI principles. So there is a certain momentum being built right now, and we need to take advantage of this occasion to set it right from the beginning and not let what happened with the internet happen again.
We all can agree with that, I think. And you've excitingly headed into the direction I was hoping to go. I have two more questions. I have so many more questions, but I want to open it up, of course, to everyone here because there's so many interesting observations here and questions, I'm sure. So that is the role of a more community-oriented, less top-down kind of system of publishing, and that, of course, includes the tremendous growth that we have seen and that you've seen at Elsevier over the years in open access publishing. And we see that in hybrid journals and full OA journals and so forth. So with the rise of open access options and at the same time these ongoing debates over paywalls, how do you ensure broad access to scholarly research and participate in OA somehow, while maintaining financial viability and a strategy that really works from a corporate perspective?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and thank you. I think that we had different answers along the different parts of our journey. So when I first arrived at Elsevier, it was a handful of years after the whole open access movement began. And I remember that one of the first things I did the very first month was to go down to NIH and meet with the director of NIH and so-called do a deal with NIH on what would be the acceptable open access policy for both sides, from the funding side, from the university side, and from publishing side. And at that moment in 2005, it was what we call green open access, which is that manuscript, not finished journal article, but manuscript, will be made available with a delay. That gives us enough time to sell subscription and sustain us, but that it would be made available. And also, Elsevier started this program called Research for Life, R4L, in which 104 of the poorest countries in the world would get access to all the journals for free because they can't afford it. It's not a question of paying less, it's just they can't afford it. But we didn't want them to fall behind. So we gave access through the United Nations to all those 104 countries for free. And it is used enormously by the researchers in those countries. As their GDP per capita rises above a line, they have to graduate and become subscriber. But we also have something called GDP pricing, so that what you pay depends on how much you invest in research in the country per capita. So we do that in a kind of rational way. But the next phase of open access debate was around something we call gold open access. That is where not the reader, but the author pays the cost of publishing, and therefore it's free immediately in its final form for the world. So in the beginning, Marriott, I was against that for a simple reason that the greedy part of me would jump on it and publish as many papers as possible to collect the fee. I would be so tempted to do so, to maximize profit, that I said, oof, I don't like this. So we actually put a brake on that part of the debate, and God, I have a lot of scars on my back from all the criticisms for not going along with it early. And we know what happened with all the vanity publishers that have popped up left and right. For $200, you can get your paper published. For $300, you can do that. And what it has done to muck up the scholarly system. After a few years, we said, okay, the system is calm. We're going to go open access gold. And since then, we have become the second largest gold open access publisher. We really believe that we should have everything available to everybody immediately. And we're having that journey now. It will take 10 years all to get everybody lined up, but 10 years is a blink in the history. But it takes time for everybody to get adjusted to it. And right now, inside the university, that transition hasn't quite yet happened, because instead of library paying for it, it has to be the research paying for it. And is the money moving between the two or not? We don't know. I know, and that is not an easy thing. You know, as a provost, you got to play the adjudication role. You know, does he go to the library or does he go to the dean of research? And who decides who gets to publish and pay for that, right? So we are taking our time. We're making it available, but the speed at which the transition happened is entirely up to the universities. So I'm sorry I've given you a very long answer, but it is actually a very interesting journey, and we're not done yet. We're probably in the last couple chapters of this phase of the journey.
Yeah, and 10 years on the history of Elsevier back to 1650 or something is, of course, not long, as you say. But
1580.
1580, thank you. If you, of course, that's the debate within university communities. And I think no one at NU Abu Dhabi especially would disagree that it is wonderful to make knowledge available for free or for very modest and reasonable cost to everyone in the world, and that you're redressing equity considerations in some degree. But of course, for a university like ours, there's also the other part of that there are many universities around the world that have really quite wonderful scholars and researchers who will now not be able to afford to publish. So there is kind of there's that. In many ways, the university should be solving this, but publishers have a role to play.
We have to solve together, because you don't want to solve one way and then create this imbalance or a gap, right? So last Monday we announced our open access author charge on a GDP pricing. We formalized it now. So an author from those Research for Life countries actually will publish for free. And then those who are, somewhat higher than that, but not quite, where other developed countries are, will get a discount, 80% discount, 60% discount, 40% discount. And then those who are coming from the most well-funded countries like the US, Japan, Europe, most of the Europe, they'll pay full price. But that is where, we have to have a community thinking. Who's subsidizing who? Not my call. It's the academic community that has to make this. And another reason, Marriott, why this has taken so long is because some of the leading countries in research volume and quality have different thoughts than other peers in other parts of the world. So I would say Europe was the most advanced, ahead of the curve people. And you can see how many countries in Europe have adopted full gold open access policy. US is just beginning. Now, if you go to China, which has now become the largest publishers of academic articles, they don't want to do it because it would cost them way too much. So it's understandable that within our community also, we don't have a full, it's kind of like the United Nations, we don't have full agreement on who's going to pay which part of this fully accessible.
Thank you very much for tackling such a complex set of issues so elegantly and clearly. Please, let's have some questions from the community. There will be a mic going around, and it's important to use it because we record, and then you can be heard. I think I saw, did you want to take, yeah, here in the back. And please say who you are briefly so YS knows.
Hello, my name is Jakob. I'm an undergraduate student. And I wanted to ask, because a question regarding fake news. With GAI, we see, it's being misused. And I wonder, are there any additional responsibilities that get born out of this fact for publishing companies or publishers in terms of how to deal with this, how to tackle this? We talked a great deal on access to information. But then again, it's also about the communicability and accessibility in terms of also the content. So not only one can access it, but understand it. And hence my question is, are there any new implications for publishers out of this?
So I would say that the implication to academic publishers like Elsevier is probably the least, because we've always had the peer review system as a bedrock, as Marriott said. And so nothing gets released into the ether until someone else checks it, right? Not just our editors, but the editors of the journals and the books. So we are least affected, even though there are fake research that is being published and we don't catch all of them immediately. The issue is, the biggest issue is in the content that is most so-called newsworthy, meaning, time sensitive. And there, the readers themselves are demanding speed over accuracy often, and makes it very vulnerable for manipulation by fake news. They have their own efforts to filter these things, but it is very, very hard when the criminals that commit these fake stuff are working harder than the police who are trying to catch it. So it comes down to one principle. Do you want your brand to be trusted or not? And if you do, then you're going to put in as much mechanism as necessary to preserve that reputation. You're part of NYU brand. That brand was not created in 10 years or 20 years. It was created over 100 plus years.
Almost 200.
Yeah. And it is so easy to lose it, and it's so hard to rebuild it. So you can imagine what the leadership of NYU is doing across all campuses to make sure that it doesn't get, black ink on their reputation. Same thing is true for the publishers. Once we lose our reputation as a truthful source of accurate information, it's really difficult to ask people to come back. So we are putting up as much as we can, but these people who are creating these fake contents, they really, frankly, wouldn't care if they got caught. And that's the problem. But we're not doing nothing. It really is about self-reputation. You have to care about it.
Samer and Marta?
So thank you for this really excellent presentation. And I think Elsevier has to be praised for the new policies on open access for least developed countries, etc. But I also want to point that in some cases, even in rich countries, you've had conflicts sometimes with some university systems, to the point where faculty members in the largest university system in the US, because you couldn't come to an agreement regarding pricing, and to the point where faculty in those universities stopped publishing in Elsevier and stopped agreeing to review. I was editor of one of the Elsevier journals, stepped down recently, and I couldn't get anybody from the University of California system to review papers for me. So what are your thoughts? I know it was resolved, but in general, what are your thoughts about that top end of the
Yeah, that's a very good point, and it's a point that is very painful to us when it happens. It doesn't happen often at all, but when it does, it's extremely visible. So there are some principles that we have to uphold, even though it is unpopular, and that is just like a police will not try to negotiate with hostage takers. We do not believe that we have a great deal of responsibility to please ideologues. That we want to be practical. We want to find win-win solutions. And when one deals with an ideologue on the other side of the table, it's a win-loss. It's never a win-win. And until that attitude changes, we don't go very far. There is enormous story behind that case, and even more stories behind the recent case that we have come to agreement in Germany. And then there are a few other smaller cases. And it really comes down to people who are involved and how flexible they are to listen to the other sides. And there are times when we have people who are just being commercial, and that's wrong. And then there are some times on the other side where people just have an ideology and a belief in a principle, and they say it's all or none, right? And that's when the talk breaks down. And both sides obviously have to make a decision to what damage it does to each other. We, as I said in the very beginning, we're in a supporting role. We're not the reason why we exist. We exist because of the research community. And so we will never badmouth anyone who is our customer. And so we will take whatever negative public relations hit that comes with it, but we will keep going at it, and we'll keep going at it to open the dialogue. And as is the case that you just cited, we will come to a win-win situation. It is painful. And there's so many times when I wish I could open my mouth and say some things to the press that I would otherwise say, except that we're Elsevier. We can't do that. We shouldn't do that. And so I'm not saying that, it takes two hands to make the sound of a clap. And so neither side is right and neither side is wrong. But it is painful memory in our history to have lost the trust of a group of academics in a place like UC, where they didn't want to deal with us. That's really painful. That's just not something we can be proud of. But as I reconstruct the whole of that experience, which happened back in 2004 and then once again in 2018 or whatever, I forgot. There's a lot that we learned from it. And one of the things that we learned is don't just listen to them when it's time to negotiate. Listen to them from the day you finish negotiation until the next one, because you need to know what really they need and adopt that early on, right? And we have sometimes dug into our trenches and didn't move, and other times the other side did, and it just doesn't help. So if I were to ever write a memoir, which I never will, but it would be pointed out as a really dark, painful moment. as an institution, but also as a leader of an institution. It was very difficult. Fortunately, I have to say, almost all of them are back. So we're very pleased with the way we're collaborating with UC, and hope it doesn't ever happen again. Yeah.
That was a great moment. We're going to go to Dean Marta Losada of Science in a minute, but the students who come to these roundtables often hear me ask about moments of failure or partial failure or misunderstanding that happen and disappointment and how those leaders dealt with it. And you just heard a perfect way of dealing with it, which is accepting responsibility, moving on and trying to do better. And it sounds like you really did learn from it, but that doesn't mean that it stops hurting. And I think that was really beautifully shared.
It does hurt forever. And it also meant that sometimes I had to remove myself from it and designate someone else to carry on. Change of players is really important in those moments. Yeah. Humbling.
I have a comment and two questions. The comment on the gold open access scenario, I mean, it depends so much also on the intrinsic funding mechanisms of the different countries for higher ed. Europe is mostly of one type, government funded all over.
Exactly.
And in other countries, there's, a lot of variety. So the adoption, of course, will vary according to that. So that's like a comment that I wanted to make.
That's a really good observation. Thank you.
And the two questions that I have is, the first one is, you've created this sophisticated data analytics on top of all the publishing efforts that you do. And it's really great. But I would like to know, what is it that you think that is really missing still? Where is it moving forward? And the second thing is, what are the insights that you're getting from what's currently, moving that are still not in the media? Which are these areas that are, you think that will be sufficiently strong in the future that maybe there will be a journal that will be created around these areas?
Journals are being created every day.
I know, so but maybe there's some special insight.
Yes, I do. I'm just being too cute about it, but the area in which I think we have still to journey, and I would say we're barely off the starting point, is the vertical analytics of the data along research fields. We have tools that look across, but we don't have a lot of tools that look vertically. We have one, for example, in chemistry. We have the organic database, Reaxis, which comes from Beilstein, original Beilstein database, and that's a great tool. We have some of them in the medical fields, like cancer or dermatology, but we just don't have enough tools that are vertical, that is really helping the researchers at the research bench itself. And I think that is an enormous area that I think over the next 10 years we're going to see flourish. And most of it, by the way, is not going to happen at Elsevier. It's going to happen at the faculty level. You will have the need, you will tinker with it and come up with something, which then you will take it to a certain level and then come and find someone else will really refine it and professionalize it to be used by many, many people. So I think that that is an area that I'm really excited about over the next coming years of using data to enhance the research itself. Across, there are many tools that already exist, such as tools to find out, I'm about to do this research. Has anyone else done it before? That is very easy to check now, right? And more like, who else is doing it right now? And look at the funding that is being given by the funding agencies, and you can see before a paper is published who has been funded to do that research. So that kind of stuff is really helpful. Unfortunately, most people are so busy that they're not even using that kind of tool today. And so it is, I wish we didn't have all of you spend a day a week writing grant proposals. I wish you had time to reallocate that to analyzing what is going on in the research world and who should I collaborate with, what should I not do, or what should I really accelerate. I wish we had more time for that, to be a bit more efficient and effective. So I think going forward, there are going to be so much use of this data by yourselves that will become ideas for us to kind of professionalize. A good example is a product in oil drilling, which we actually had to stop because it really went against our ESG philosophy. But there was a tool.
You could still do it here.
Yes. So that was for the geologists, very specifically for them. And we'd like to see thousands of those happen, thousands of them. The best area right now where it's accelerating is in the medicine and clinical area. We're seeing that really take off in the last 1 year or two. So, every day I come across an article that says AI can improve the detection of cancer. I'm coming across things like that all the time, right? So I think that medicine is jumping on it, but the other areas of research will follow. I'm sure of it, not far behind. Hope I answer that question.
The provost here in the front, and then we'll go to the back, and we can see well around, and then we have Sunil, the first Dean of Engineering here.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for such an engaging, and I'll say even inspiring set of exchanges, ideas, and you see many more questions to be asked. I would really love if you could speculate a bit about the future, say the next 5 to 10 years, how you're seeing all of these activities going forward, and particularly picking up on your restaurant metaphor, where you have the research analytics and what you imagine that space would start to look like.
Predicting the future is always a very dangerous thing to do, and I certainly am not learned enough to be right. But if it's 5 years, I think it's close enough around the corner that I can give it a shot. I think that the pace at which these data analytic tools are going to move is going to be breathtaking. And it's not because the technology is going to improve that fast necessarily. It's because the adoption is going to be so fast. It's kind of like when first mobile phone was being distributed and how the curve went like this. It's the number of people who are trying to use these that is going to accelerate ideas. The ideas don't come from us, hardly ever. It always comes from the users. And so as a user community starts to use, they will have 1 million ideas that will translate into product-worthy efforts. I think in medicine, it will be around not just the analytics, but also predictive. And that's the next phase of quote-unquote AI that will have to develop. Now, one of the reasons that I always attribute the availability of large language model to exist today in the form that it does is not the algorithm, it's not the software, it's the hardware. The cost of processing data has dropped so much over these past few years that teaching the machine to consume that much information is now affordable. It wasn't affordable before. Now it's completely affordable. This little thing that we carry around has more computational power than the first computer at MIT, right? By what? By a million times? I mean, it's the number is incredible, whatever that number is. It's irrelevant what the actual number is, but it's just the hardware cost of putting through this much stuff to compute and to remember is dropping fast, and it's going to continue to drop. And as it does, then I think we're going to see these predictive models really become powerful. And there are things in which you don't need predictive models. Like you don't need to know what color tie I'm going to wear tomorrow. Okay, but it could.
Well.
It could. It could. But I do want to know, better about the weather patterns, for example, right? Like the amount of rain we're going to get, or things like that, much more precisely. So I think that's the excitement 5 years around. Anything beyond that, who knows? Who knows? But I certainly hope that NYU, as I always advocate in the top universities around the world, will invest as much into humanities and ethics as it will in the science and engineering. I mean, not dollar for dollar, but in terms of energy, human energy, because we have to control this.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jihyun, and I'm a senior student from South Korea, and and I really enjoy your speech, especially you have a Korean background. And my question is more about like your career path as you change your career industry like 3, 4 times, like 5 times, actually more than I thought. So I just wonder what was the motivation or your source of bravery to change your career path like a lot or like in diverse ways, especially you started like your career at financial industry, which is pretty much lucrative and very respected area. Thank you.
Thanks for posing that question in such a positive way. Like I always tell this to students that I've never made an industry decision. I've never made a job decision. I've never made a geography decision. I've lived in 14 countries in the world, and I had to learn 6 different languages. But really, my career changes have been a result of the people that I chose to work with. I chose to work with this family that took me in when I was at the bottom of my life, and have been ever since. That's 42 years. And last 28 years, overlapping that with my business partner and now my boss. As you may recall, in 1979, the Korean president at the time was assassinated. And a few months later, there was a coup d'etat. And unfortunately, that was not a bloodless coup d'etat. And my father, who had spent all of his life working for the government, had come out against it. And the consequence was not pretty. And I was left in this country alone, with no communication with my family and no source of support. It was at the time that this very, very generous family stepped up and said, "You do not worry, we'll take care of you." And they became my American family. So I call them mom and dad, and their 4 children are my siblings. And all their children are my nephews and nieces. And that's why I have so many nephews and nieces, because I have my own family and then I have my American family. Extraordinary family. And this going back to the late 70s when people like me on American elite campuses were not that prevalent, right? They turned out to be one of the most influential and wealthy families in the world. I didn't know, because their son didn't act like one. We just thought he was like anybody else, only to find out that he was on the top 50 Forbes list. And he was running the 4th largest private company in the world. And that family changed my life, because they gave me a protection to keep doing what I do. And I made a promise that I would always prioritize the family priority. And when they called me in the middle of my amazing banking career, I had gone from being the head of private banking in a company called American Express, which is not an unknown company, and I was 29. I accepted a job to join as a management trainee of a startup IT company, taking 87% cut in my compensation because it was family call. And that was the best thing I've ever done. I learned IT. I'm no longer scared of technology. I'm not a technologist at all, but I'm not scared of it. And just less than a handful of years ago, I taught myself how to do Python when my brain was already too thick to learn. I'm not afraid to learn. That family, I ended up running that business for 10 years. Then I left, and now I'm back on the board. But I'm giving you a very long answer to say that I've only made people decision. I've never made a directional decision on geography, industry, company, compensation, any of these things. These things are not that important. They come in the end. But if you're not happy with the people you're around with, you can never be happy on anything else. And so I would urge all the young people to not get jaded by the lure of what's right in front of you, but by the people that will make the true experience of your life, right? Friends, spouses, colleagues, neighbors, whatever it may be. Just always make a person decision, never make an institution decision. You come to campus visits, don't make it because of the buildings or because of its reputation and ranking. Do it because when you sat in the Commons and listen to what the students are saying, you say, I would like to be in that conversation, right? You make a people decision. And I think that will always be right in the end. So I hope that you will have that so-called bravery. It wasn't a bravery. It's just, I think looking back, it was just rational, right?
You've often described it as rational to me, and I think there's enormous fortitude in it myself. And I want to thank you for sharing that story with this whole group. You've shared it with me before, but this is not something that YS goes around and talks a lot about, even though I do think you should write that memoir because you're a wonderful storyteller and you have an important story to tell. Sunil, I don't know what you're going to say, but good luck. Last question.
Well, thank you very much for that. That was a wonderful question and a fabulous answer. So I'll bring it back down to earth, I guess. You had said something about peer review being the bedrock of academic publishing. Do you think it's in distress, or is it going to last, or is there some other technological means to sort of enhance it? Because I feel that that's one of the areas that's really not sustainable.
It is the bedrock, and we cannot compromise on that. The tools we use to conduct peer review might improve, right? Be less friction or more efficient. But if we lose that trust mechanism, then I don't think we have anything different than being a magazine publisher, right? Where the power resides on the editor alone. And today we have a very simple policy that we uphold as commandment number 1 or 2, and that is editorial independence. So many times one of our editors would publish something and that is extraordinarily unpopular or even is critical of us, and we say editorial independence. We cannot touch that, right? It's like the academic freedom. And we just hope that somebody else will jump into the fray and debate, but we cannot tell that person, no, you cannot publish that editorial on, say, the current situation in the geopolitics. We can't do that. What we can do is to point to an unethical behavior and influence that way. So going back to your question about peer review, I think peer review is under great deal of distress right now because of the explosive amount of research output that is trying to be published, especially in countries that have recently joined into that volume and does not necessarily have the years of experience and discipline to publish correctly, right? In some of the world, parts of the world, the publish or perish paradigm is so misunderstood that they're now doing what we call salami publishing, right? What you would publish as a one paper is being published as 9 papers. 80%, 90% of the content is the same, a little bit is changed, and they republish it because they want the number of articles. And then they self-cite between the articles and try to get as many citations as possible. That's all fake. To me, that's all fake. And those have to be, triaged out. But it takes time. And that is putting so much pressure. And these new people, the younger generation of researchers coming up, are not necessarily being taught by the seniors that participating in peer review is an obligation of the community. But they say, oh, I'm too busy doing my work, so I don't have time to review someone else's paper. Or they do it and it's so poorly done that they might as well not have done it. So those are issues that put the strain on the peer review system today. I hope that the tools we provide will alleviate some of that pressure. For example, if you serve as an editor of our journal and you are given a submission, we now give you a tool that can choose who would be the best reviewers for that paper. It's under algorithm. It may not be right. But then, again, he intervenes, and then he say, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. No, not that one. And there's a human intervention at the end. So we hope that we provide continuously these AI-based tools, but could they replace the peer review? I know this is being recorded, but God, I hope not. I really hope that never happens. I hope that we continue to give tools that make it easier to do good peer review rather than replace peer review with another mechanism. I really hope so.
I'm really glad that's on the record. And no, not at all. On the contrary, I'm thrilled it's on the record because I believe it myself. And I think this institution does. It's all about the people in the end and the expertise that we built over so many years. YS gave us a wonderful metaphor of the restaurant, the research kitchen where people cook themselves. I'm going to give you one little dessert, or rather YS is going to give it to us. We've talked a lot about mentorship. Clearly you had great mentors and you are a great mentor. I know how many people you mentor in their very different roles, always speaking for diversity, equity and access as you do. But this little dessert is really for Ron Berry, who is not only a wonderful librarian, but also just about a golf pro. And he loves our Saadiyat course. And YS, when he's not doing the 100,000 other things he does, loves golf. He's a man in full. But he doesn't just play. No, he actually mentors. And he has a very specific, bespoke, completely personal mentorship program that I want you to tell everybody about. Just briefly. How are you helping young people, and why are you helping these young people become golf pros?
So just to give you a little background there, because I have to be contextualized. When I lived in Africa, I wanted to make money, and the only job I could get was to be a caddy. As you know, in Senegal, the golf course is actually desert. And as a caddy, you pick up these little twigs as you walk, and then when you get to the ball, you put the ball on top of a little bird nest, and that was part of the role. I continued that on in high school. When I came to America, there was a 9-hole golf course on campus, and I made money that way. And I did that also in college. So I've been actually a caddy for 10 years. That's really my career in golf. Then at age about 30, I finally had a chance to play golf. But by then, I was really not going to learn the proper golf swing that a young kid can do. But I'm still holding a decent handicap, and I just love being out there with the right people. What happened is that somehow that word got into people's ears that I had caddied for multiple US Open, and that is actually true. I have actually caddied. And they asked me to join the USGA board. And I had to decline because I just joined the Princeton board. I'd just taken this job, and it was just too much time. I couldn't do it. But I recommended someone else, and that person got on the board. Same thing happened the next year. And then the third year, they said, I said, stop. I have someone else. And they said, no, 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 no. We want you to join the nominating committee of the board. And that's not as much time. So I said, okay, I'll do that. And so I got involved with USGA, and wow, what an experience to learn about the history of the game and how it affects, the communities. That gave me an opportunity to play Pro-Am, and I came across several professionals. And once again, this is the reason why I tell all the young people, I am the luckiest person you'll ever meet in your life. There is no chance that you'll meet someone else who's as lucky as I am. Because every pro that I have met in this circumstance are the ones that everybody would agree are the most gentlemanly, most adroit persons on the tour. And I become friends and mentor to them. Then I learned about junior golf that produces these professionals, and learned that in Europe, almost all of them come from not so well-to-do families. And to go from an amateur to pro takes incredible work, but also money to sustain and to enter tournaments, to travel to and whatnot. So my wife and I have a foundation that gives out scholarship, and now we are very lucky to mentor some incredible young golfers that are on the path. Many of them were here in Abu Dhabi 10 days ago or 2 weeks ago when Abu Dhabi hosted the World Amateur Team Championship. And I get incredible high out of watching these players accomplish something that they never thought they could. So it's one sliver of very, very fun mentoring that I do. It's not about swing. It's about mental game. And, I think this complements really well the rest of the mentoring that I get to do otherwise. Yeah. And, because I'm a product of a mentoring, I have an opportunity to give back.
Thank you, IS. I guess you gained about 3 dozen mentees here this afternoon. We are so grateful to you. You're a very busy man and have to get on a board meeting. I know that. So please, everyone, thanks our wonderful IS here.
Thank you so much for having me, Marriott. Yeah. Thank you so much.